weather modification, cloud seeding, chemtrails, geoengineering, solar geoengineering. I'm sure you've heard those terms. I'm not sure whether or not you could actually define them, but they're all talking points from the left. Now, I realize there's a new administration in Washington, D.C., but we still have a lot of very, very out there liberal crazy types who are in the federal government, who are in many state governments, who are in many county governments, many city governments. They're working at all the big think tanks, and they really and truly believe that unless we curtail the use of fossil fuels, life on Earth is going to end, and it will not end well. What I'm about to do is read you chapter 9 from my book, Climate Cult. It's a chapter entitled Weather Gods. It's one of the longer chapters in the book, but this whole idea for this podcast came from a conversation my wife and I were having just yesterday. As we were driving, we noticed, she said, "Look at all those contrails. What in the heck?" And they were contrails that were zigzagging across the sky in such a manner that these were not transcontinental jet routes. It was like Charlotte's Web in the sky. It was absolutely mesmerizing. What are they doing up there? Well, listen, I've written extensively about this, and I compiled all my notes into the book Climate Cult. In terms of people I trust on this topic, there are about a handful. I used some of their information in the book, and it's footnoted accordingly. But most of the information you get about chemtrails, geoengineering, weather manipulation, weather modification, it's not sound science. I will use sound science to show you, to tell you what they're doing in our skies. So strap in, and I'm just going to start reading here and probably pop off and opine a little bit here and there. But I begin this chapter by saying 1.5 degrees Celsius, all caps. The atmospheric warming threshold, the tipping point. The mercury spike that will shatter the Earth's temperature forever and bring a sweltering end to all life on Earth. The dreaded 1.5 degree temperature rise must be averted at all costs. Or so go the invocations of the maniacal high priests of the climate cult. Their climate change catechism contends that since the last ice age, some 12,000 years ago, the Earth was naturally moderating until humans discovered evil fossil fuels, an abundant source of cheap energy that enabled capitalists to exploit labor and launch a revolution, the Industrial Revolution. After the births and deaths of millions of humans, along with their countless polluting cars, trucks, buses, trains, planes, large houses, office buildings, stores, paved streets, and parking lots for their personal vehicles, the Earth's temperature has now risen by 1.2 Celsius. Dun, dun, dun. Any day, they tell us, it could reach the doomsday mark of 1.5. That's why the world's citizens must adopt and conform to net zero. And if that does not reverse the cursed thermometer, more drastic measures must be taken. Oh, they must. All the computers and all the computer models tell us so. And more dramatic measures have already been in the works for quite a while. If the sound scientific evidence, which I talk about at length in previous chapters, here in Climate Cult, didn't reveal otherwise, this could all sound like an outrageous CGI sci-fi movie trailer. But the reality is, it's actually a slick propaganda pitch designed to coerce us into government compliance, and in far too many cases, it's worked amazingly well. Thank God we have a new sheriff in Washington, D.C. Thank God for this new administration that gets it. There's one character in that administration, by the way, who, at least when I wrote this book, was not on our same page at all. But thank God with the effort that he's been tasked to do. He's doing a great job, and I won't mention any names at this point in time. You probably, some of you know exactly who I'm talking about. Ask someone who's been indoctrinated by the climate change propaganda about the 1.5 disaster zone we are allegedly fast approaching. With the world temperature already warmed up by 1.2 degrees Celsius, will we even notice another 0.3 degree increase? Just ask somebody that. They'll have no idea how to answer the question. Will you really notice that 0.3 degree increase that you say we're about to see, and that when it happens, all hell's going to break loose on planet Earth? Most likely, his or her response will be rote, Google-like, an explanation that says something to the effect of, even a small rise in temperature will increase the frequency and intensity of extreme weather events around the world, including droughts, storms, wildfires, and heat waves. I'm sure if you were to Google this right now, that's what you would hear. But what about extreme cold temperatures, you might ask? And they'll come back with another Google-like response. The Earth is currently experiencing the warmest weather on record. See, they won't answer the question. And if you press them further on the issue, the response might be a curt, there is no extreme cold. Do you realize every day on planet Earth, I'm getting away from the book for a moment, every day on planet Earth there's a record low temperature set somewhere? Multiple record low temperatures set somewhere. They don't want to talk about that. Even though so I wrote this in 2024. So in the book I say, even though just last year, 2023, Mount Washington, New Hampshire, reported a wind chill of minus 108 degrees Fahrenheit, the coldest temperature ever in the United States. And California recorded its fifth coldest March since 1885. And that's just in the United States. So when you talk to them about that and global warming, they'll say, no, it's all called climate change. 2021, the United States Antarctic Program of the National Science Foundation and the National Snow and Ice Data Center reported the average temperature at the South Pole between their winter months of April and September was minus 78 Fahrenheit, the coldest on record. So cold, the extremes pushed ice levels surrounding the continent to one of their highest levels ever. You never heard that from CNN, did you? You never heard that from ABC, NBC, CBS, did you? You never heard that from the New York Times or the San Francisco Chronicle or any of those rags, did you? And when you bring this to someone's attention, you're met with silence. Why? Because the cult is not interested in the facts. You could even say this. A Nobel-winning prize physicist says the so-called climate emergency claims are a dangerous corruption of science that threatens the world's economy and the well-being of millions of people. That would be Nobel laureate John Clauser. But you see, you bring those facts forward, you bring the facts forward that are in climate cult, they don't want to hear it. It's one of these. Na, 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 na. They plug their ears, start making noise because they don't want to hear what you have to say. By now, it should seem apparent that the climate change adherents of all stripes, from innocent grade schoolers to the PhDs, usually have no time for debate. And why should they? They remain smugly confident in their dogma or prophetic belief that the world is rumbling wildly toward the 1.5 degree extinction threshold. The ice will melt, causing the oceans to rise and submerge the islands, and that will generate hurricanes that will fill the atmosphere with rivers of water that will drop rain bombs from the sky, causing worldwide flooding and upheaval. Yet even when eminent scientists like Dr. John Clauser, by the way, winner of 2 Nobel Prizes in physics, steps forward to proclaim the climate change agenda is being driven by, quote, massive shock journalistic pseudoscience, they plug their ears and they refuse to listen. Tone deaf or truth deaf, the climate change leaders continue to plow forward with plans frighteningly beyond net zero, despite the potentially dangerous consequences. I go in to talk about John Clauser's resume. It's stellar. He, from 69 to 96, he worked at the Lawrence Berkeley National Laboratory. Lawrence Livermore National Laboratory, University of California. And as I mentioned, he has received 2 Nobel Prizes in his distinguished field. And he contends there is no climate crisis. I'm going to read something that he had to say. The popular narrative about climate change reflects a dangerous corruption of science that threatens the world's economy and well-being of billions of people. Misguided climate science has metastasized into massive shock journalistic pseudoscience. In turn, the pseudoscience has become a scapegoat for a wide variety of other unrelated ills. It has been promoted and extended by similarly misguided business marketing agents, politicians, journalists, government agencies, as well as environmentalists. In my opinion, there is no real climate crisis. John Clauser. Clauser has developed a climate model that provides a vital dynamic that the current simulations, the ones that mainstream media relies on to this day, the one that the Democratic Party swears by, the one used to forecast the 1.5 degree powder keg, they don't want to hear what he has to say. The atmospheric layer just above the Earth, where the weather occurs, is the troposphere. It averages about 40,000 feet high. That's almost 8 miles. And it gets its name from the Greek word tropos, meaning turn. So named because the lower portion of the troposphere is where air is warmed by the Earth's surface and rises, promoting vertical mixing or turning, if you will. The troposphere contains roughly 80% of the mass of the Earth's atmosphere. It's huge. It's dynamic. It's vitally important to life here on Earth. The layer above the troposphere is the stratosphere. It extends from the top of the troposphere to an altitude of about 180,000 feet. That's 34 miles up. Now, in contrast to the troposphere, this is very important, which experiences decreasing temperatures with altitude. The stratosphere temperatures increase as you get farther away from the Earth and closer to the sun. This vital layer possesses ozone, which absorbs ultraviolet radiation from the sun, protecting life on Earth from too much heat. There is little mixing or turning of the stratosphere, or turning in the stratosphere, and scant weather, though clouds do form near the poles and giant thunderheads regularly burst upward into the region. But it's not a layer that creates its own weather. The towering tropospheric cumulus clouds and thunderstorms, which produce 100 lightning flashes on Earth every second, and all the other various clouds scattered across the skies, play a preeminent role in the Earth's colossal climate system. The clouds, constantly churning and morphing in the troposphere, reflect the sun's energy back to space and trap heat that's rising from the Earth's surface. It's an awesome process, which I write in the book, I contend is divine. This was put together by God for us. And therein lies a significant problem for the climate change cultists. The climate models, listen to this now because it's very important. You may have never heard this before. If you have heard it before, you need to hear it again. The climate models that all these doomsayers adhere to and swear by cannot accurately account for clouds or thunderstorms or even water vapor, which is the most abundant greenhouse gas in our atmosphere. There's also another inherent shortcoming in the models, in that they are unable to accurately replicate the powerful ocean currents that act as massive weather conveyor belts, moving massive air masses and storms all over the Earth. These currents naturally regulate the Earth's temperature by transporting the waters warmed by the sun in the tropics up or down, if you will, to the poles and back again. The ocean's currents in and of themselves are incredibly complex. driven by a combination of variable water temperatures, salinity gradients, surface winds, the Earth's rotation, and the gravital effects of the sun and the moon causing the tides. Adding to this complexity is the fact that the currents typically flow clockwise in the northern hemisphere and counterclockwise in the southern hemisphere, and change course when they cross the equator. This constant undergoing circulation assists in counteracting the uneven distribution of solar radiation that reaches the Earth's surface. That God is a masterful designer when you think about how the weather works on planet Earth. And by the way, to our knowledge, there's no other planet like it in the entire universe. This may be it. At least that's what we know of right now. But all these fascinating points are impossible to properly input into the mathematical computer simulations. Everything I just told you about. That doesn't go into the computer models that are telling us that we're aimed for disaster on planet Earth. Again, they don't. You look at these computer models, they can't even predict cloud cover. It's a mystery to the models. There's so much wild imagination and guessing and hyperbole that goes into their recommendations and their scare tactics. It's horrible. But all these fascinating fine points are impossible to properly input into the mathematical computer simulations. Hence, the experts need to approximate, and what they cannot approximate is simply omitted, or in some cases just make up a number. No one will ever know. So one must at least wonder if personal bias or political agendas ever come into play when a scientist approximates or guesses or omits information in the model. Listen, if you're on the left and you really want to see fossil fuels go to hell in a handbasket, then you've got to jack up these models to fit your philosophy. And I believe they're only human. Of course they're going to do this if they have the opportunity. Especially when, for example, they don't believe in God. So there's no consequence to lying. Sin, that's made up. I'll do whatever I damn well please. That's the thought, I'm sure, behind some of these climate scientists who are putting this stuff out there. And I hope the Trump administration is able to go through every agency in the federal government where these people exist and get rid of them. Defund them. The fact is, climate models are known to greatly underestimate the feedback from the clouds and thus have a poor record of accomplishment. Apart from failing to predict the lack of global warming in the early 2000s, there was, in the early 2000s, about the time I was writing my book, Climate Gate, there was no global warming at all. The temperature was not rising at all. So what was causing that? I mean, there were still more and more and more people on the earth. We were still putting more and more and more CO2 in the atmosphere. But they don't want to address that. And as a former weather forecaster, I can say with certainty that a prediction for the next day, okay, when I was doing weather on television, whether it was the CBS television network or the CBS TV station in San Francisco, your prediction for the next day is about 90%. When it comes to a general description of what's coming, sunny, hot, cold, wind, rain, snow, so forth. A 5-day forecast is broadly accurate around 70% of the time when you're looking for the specific high and low temperature and an overall idea what the weather's going to be like. But by the time you get to a 10-day forecast, it's rough. Don't go to the bank on that long-term forecast that your TV weather guy or gal's giving you. I'm just saying. So how do these people in these high places make these forecasts for decades out? And that's what I mentioned in this portion of the book. Astronaut Harrison Schmitt, I'll jump ahead, the PhD geologist who walked on the moon, spoke about the models at a conference of professional science writers. I've I had some excellent conversations with Harrison Schmidt. He's just a super guy. He said, I'm a geologist. I know the Earth is not nearly as fragile as we tend to think it is. It has gone through climate change. It is going through climate change at the present time. The only question is there any evidence that human beings are causing that change? Right now in my profession, there is no evidence, though there are models, but models of very, very complex natural systems are often wrong. The observations we make as geologists and observational climatologists do not show any evidence that human beings are causing this. Now, there is a whole bunch of unknowns. We don't know how much CO2, for example, is being released by the southern oceans as a result of natural climate change that's been going on now since the last ice age. So why? Why the skepticism that I have? Why do I have this skepticism, he asks. What is the cause of climate change? He goes on to say this: I, as a scientist, expect to have people question orthodoxy. Again, listen to what he's saying. The climate has always changed. That's the nature of climate. It's constantly changing, evolving. And I think you could even say adapting in some ways. But it's not being caused by any kind of human interference. That's just so arrogant. We think we're so great. We're not that great. God put this whole thing into place for us to enjoy, for us to be able to live and thrive and progress. So he says this: I, as a scientist, expect to have people question orthodoxy. You can't, in the world of climate science, you can't question this. They won't allow it. They'll shut you up. They'll shut you off. You can't do that. If you want to get funding for your particular project, oh boy, you'd better be a global warmer, because if you're not going to get the funding. Try to go to work at a major university. Let's say you love meteorology, or you're just like I do. You just love meteorology. You love to talk about it. You love to read about it. You love to experience it. You love to teach it. Try go to a major university and say, but I'm not a believer in human-caused global warming. You'd never get a job. You'd never be able to teach. So he says, now, unfortunately, funding by governments, particularly the United States government, is biasing science towards what the government wants to hear. That's a very dangerous thing that's happening in science today. And it's not just climate science. I see it in my own lunar research. If NASA's interested in a particular conclusion, if NASA is interested in a particular conclusion, then that's the way the proposals come in for funding. He's talking about the same thing that takes place. It's a bastardization of science. And this is what Dr. Clauser was talking about as well. The question is, I write, are those driving the climate agenda willing to consider Dr. Clauser's conclusions? Well, my experience says no. The agenda is being driven by a consortium of organizations and governments who seek to dismantle life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness anywhere such ideals are found. And the insidious tangent of this agenda, the one that keeps me up at night, is known as geoengineering, and we're going to talk about that. It's a topic that is too often quickly dismissed as a conspiracy theory associated with contrails. But that is false information. The climate agenda really has plans to create and manipulate weather to transform the global atmosphere. They have positioned themselves as weather gods. Now, I write, weather can be modified, even on a large scale. We've been doing this for a long time. The United States discovered this procedure in World War II. And the United States government has, primarily the military, has been refining it ever since, as I will explain. Currently, some 50 countries are also engaged in weather and climate adaptation. China boasts employing, ready for this? China boasts employing 37,000 people engaging in weather warfare on its behalf. Do you remember the last Olympics in Beijing? It was so smoggy, it was sickening people. People who were coming to Beijing that weren't used to that kind of stuff were being literally throwing up. So what did Beijing do? They took out their climate scientists and they started seeding the clouds, and they brought forth a monster rainstorm that washed all that crap out of the skies. And this is what China does on a regular basis in the bigger cities. When the pollution becomes too big, they rain it out of the sky. GeoEngineering had its inception in the mind of Nobel Prize-winning American physicist, chemist, and engineer Dr. Irving Langmuir during World War II. Along with Dr. Vincent Schaefer, Langmuir was employed by General Electric and tasked with finding a way to de-ice military aircraft and create aerial smoke screens and even generate weather modification. This was all done in an effort to win World War II. On November 13, 1946, Schaefer was flown by pilot Curtis Talbot at an altitude of 14,000 feet, about 30 miles east of Schenectady, New York, to conduct an experiment, make snow. In a brief instructional film produced by GE a year later, Schaefer described the details of the experiment. 6 pounds of dry ice, that's basically frozen carbon dioxide, were delivered into a 4-mile wide cloud formation. As they turned back to look at the clouds, Schaefer noted, quote, "Within a very few minutes, we saw long streamers of snow falling from the base of the cloud and evaporating through drier air below. With much enthusiasm," he continued, "under many conditions, of course, full-fledged snowstorms will be produced this way. Nature at last has permitted us to do a little something about the weather." So he's admitting, listen, we developed a way to make snow in the sky. He thought it was pretty cool. All of their experiments were designed to better the military of the United States of America. It was not designed to alter the climate of the Earth. Schaefer's experiments verified a hypothesis originally advanced back in 1933 by a Swedish meteorologist and a German physicist. I mentioned their names, but I'll just continue. That clouds would precipitate if they contained the right mixture of ice crystals and supercooled water drops. Again, these are curious scientists conducting some experiments. While common dry ice with no harm intended. While common dry ice was the original weather-making ingredient, further experimentation discovered that silver iodide was even more effective for making weather, like snowstorms or rainstorms. Soon after, the first indications of something far greater than just clearing precipitation from the sky became apparent. The possibilities led to the military to support a broad theoretical laboratory and field program in cloud modification from 1947 to 1952, known as Project Cirrus. Dr. Langmuir was involved in the project, which included 181 air missions. In Cirrus's official summary notes, he states, "Such work could easily have profound economical, political, and military effect." Langmuir soon became recognized as the pioneer in rainmaking. In an article from the Charlotte Daily Mail, I should say Charleston Daily Mail, that's in Charleston, West Virginia, he refers to his discovery as comparable to an atomic bomb. This is very interesting. Can't be taken out of context, so I'm going to read this for you. Rainmaking, he says, or weather control, can be as powerful a weapon as the atom bomb. He goes on to say this: rainmaking should seize, the government, I should say, should seize on the phenomenon of weather control as it did atomic energy. When Albert Einstein told the late President Roosevelt in 1939 of the potential power of an atom-splitting weapon. In the amount of energy liberated, the effect of 30 milligrams of silver iodide, this is Langmuir talking, under the optimum conditions, just 30 milligrams of silver iodide under optimum conditions equals that of one atomic bomb. That's the amount of energy. You know, I mean, there's a tremendous amount of energy in the weather. When there is a thunderstorm, that's just an incredible burst of energy in the sky. So what he's saying is it doesn't take a lot to create a lot of weather on planet Earth. In August 1953, the U.S. formed the President's Advisory Committee on Weather Control. This is really interesting. Its stated purpose was to make, I'm quoting here, a complete study of the evaluation of public and private experiments in weather control for the purpose of determining the extent to which the United States should experiment with, engage in, or regulate activities designed to control weather conditions. I've got all this footnoted in the book, by the way. In 1958, the committee's chairman, Captain Howard Orville, a graduate of the Naval Academy with an advanced degree in meteorology from MIT, warned, quote, "If an unfriendly nation solves the problem of weather control and gets into the position to control the large-scale weather patterns before we can, the results could be even more disastrous than nuclear warfare." So there were people working on this project that realized, man, in the hands of bad actors, this could be bad, really bad. And that's where I believe we are now. We have bad actors, some of whom are at universities in the United States of America, who do not have good intentions for this stuff. Because they're half crazy with a political agenda of their own. And their political ideology, by the way, is what's made them half crazy, if not fully crazy. A year earlier, in 1957, Lyndon B. Johnson was the Senate Majority Leader and leader of the Democrat political opposition to the Republican President Dwight Eisenhower. LBJ forced Eisenhower into a space race he did not want after the USSR got the jump on the United States with the launch of Sputnik 1, the first artificial space satellite. LBJ had big technological ambitions. On May 27, 1962, as John F. Kennedy's vice president, he presented a stirring graduation address at his alma mater, Southwest Texas State University. Besides speaking of technology that would someday, quote, permit the people of the world to watch one television program at the same time throughout the world, he's talking about cable and satellite TV. Way back when, and again, back in the day, TV was so primitive. Just getting a network broadcast across one country was an impossible thing. But here he is talking about that back in 1962, and then he boldly declares this. Listen to this. Such innovation would, quote, would lay the predicate and the foundation for the development of a weather satellite that will permit man to determine the world's cloud layer and ultimately to control the weather. And he who controls the weather will control the world. So the race was on in the United States. We need to get a handle on this, and we need to get a handle on this thing quickly before other countries do. As president in 1965, LBJ composed a special commission on weather modification that produced a 149-page report supporting the continuation of exercises to control the weather. Listen to this. This is right from the report. It should be clear that a long-range program of weather and climate modification can have a direct bearing upon the main purposes of American foreign policy. It can contribute to defending the security of the United States and other nations of the free world. It can aid in the economic and social advancement of the developing countries, many of which face problems associated with diverse climatic conditions and serious imbalances in soil and water resources. The challenge and the opportunity presented to the world community by the prospects of man's achieving the ability to modify the atmospheric environment form one of the most exciting long-range aspects of the subject. It involves the possible acquisition of a new and enormous power to influence the conditions of human life. The potentialities for beneficial application are vast, as are the potential dangers. This is what scares me about climate modification. This is what scares me and should scare you about geoengineering. This is real. And there are a lot of bad actors who could pull the levers and push the buttons to make things happen. In October 1966, during the Vietnam War, the Johnson administration authorized a military weather modification exercise that worked just as anticipated. It was Project Popeye. Project Popeye launched more than 50 cloud seeding flights to disperse particulate above the routes used to bring communist troops and supplies into South Vietnam. Though the project could likely impact neighboring Laos, the Laotian government was never consulted nor warned. In 1967, a memorandum addressed to the U.S. Secretary of State Dean Rusk illustrated the results of this Project Popeye. 82% of the clouds seeded produced rain within a brief period after seeding, a percentage appreciably higher than normal expectation in the absence of seeding. 82% of the time they were able to create rainstorms. The amount of rainfall induced by seeding is believed to have been sufficient to have contributed substantially to rendering vehicle routes in this area inoperable. They flooded roads. In one instance, rainfall continued as the cloud moved eastward across the Vietnam border and inundated a U.S. Special Forces camp with 9 inches of rain in 4 hours. What I found amazing about that is I had a friend who was in Laos, where American troops were not supposed to be. He was Special Forces. He was in Laos and told me about some of these violent rainstorms that they experienced there. And I've always wondered, my gosh, was he underneath one of these experiments that was let loose? This is like Sky Wars, my friends. In August 2008, shortly before the opening ceremonies of the Summer Olympics in Beijing, the sky was obscured by thick smog. Not a good backdrop for modern China's televised debut on the world stage. But the communist regime was ready. What did they do? They washed that stuff out of the skies, just like I told you earlier. This is called geoengineering. And be sure, this is not innocent tinkering. Geoengineering is well beyond simple dry ice or silver iodide, and it's fraught with risk. Weather modification, like geoengineering, is taking place all over the world. Through aerosol dispersal of toxic metals and harmful chemicals that, combined with the worldwide grid of high frequency, it's called HARP. You may have heard of HARP before. But it's a worldwide grid, high frequency active auroral research program technology. It poses a real and frightening threat to all mankind. HARP is not conspiracy theory. HAARP is not conspiracy theory. It's not make-believe. It's real. There's lots of documentation. Some of it's in Climate Cult. In fact, everything that was available at the time I wrote this book is in the book. And the stratosphere, too, can be manipulated. Here's the deal. These bioweapons may be causing an increase. The stuff that's being sprayed in the sky to modify the weather. The weather here, the weather there, the overall climate. There are many actors involved in all of this, from private enterprises, think tanks, universities, governments. These bioweapons may be causing an increase in respiratory and skin diseases, toxic metals, harmful chemicals. It's not silver iodide anymore. They're using all sorts of stuff. It's not the old-fashioned cloud seeding any longer. There is much speculation regarding those who may be behind this weather modification and why. But 2 facts are glaringly obvious. 1, chemical spraying from planes is happening every day around the world. We know this. 2, the governments of the world, including our own, are not being forthright. I'm waiting for the Trump administration to give us more information about this, because I know there are people within the administration who agree with everything I'm saying. I'm not being critical of the administration. I'm just patiently waiting. I'm patiently waiting for them to take the lid off this Pandora's box. And who knows, maybe it's so when they do take the lid off or put the whole damn program to sleep, it'll be so scary they don't even want to tell us. It's better we don't know. But here's the deal. These dangers don't even include the risks associated with weaponizing the technology for weather warfare to control the world. Because if this is possible, if this is theoretically possible, you better believe the United States military knows all about it. And if it is something that could be used in the event of a world war, I just pray to God we know more about it than the other countries do. But the stratosphere, now let me go back to the stratosphere. As I write here, that too can be manipulated if seeded with particulate matter like aluminum oxide or sulfur dioxide. Artificial clouds can be formed in the stratosphere to reflect sunlight and radiation away from the Earth to cool the planet. That's called solar geoengineering. Now you're screwing with Mother Nature big time because you're creating clouds in an area where there are not supposed to be any clouds. So what if a country or wealthy individual, name the person, unilaterally decided to act and deploy aerosols into the atmosphere to reduce the temperature? Who knows how such spraying could throw the climate completely out of whack in the troposphere, let alone the harmful health effects from dispersing such toxins around the world. There's a dramatic research paper that was prepared for the Air Force in 1996, Owning the Weather in 2025. I use this paper in this particular chapter, but it details topics such as, this is again 1996, storm enhancement, which leads to decreasing human comfort levels. So let's just rain the hell out of the sky to wipe out this population over here and get them under our clutches. Precipitation avoidance, which is actually improving comfort level. So in other words, man, it's just been so stormy in this particular place. We've got troops moving across. Let's enhance the weather. Let's get rid of these storms so we can advance our troops. It also talks about the alteration of global climate on a far-reaching and or long-lasting scale. Did you hear what I said? The alteration of global climate on a long-lasting scale. Now, the authors, at least in this report, said it was not possible in 1996. But they did say once available, it would be considered, quote, it would be considered for, quote, potential military operations. Even the Biden administration's 2021 National Intelligence Estimate on Climate Change sounded the alarm about these risks, but nobody paid attention, highlighting, quote, the increasing chance that countries will unilaterally test and deploy large-scale solar geoengineering, creating a new area of geopolitical disputes. That's from the National Intelligence Estimate of 2021. It's in the book. Now, I write, there are currently many players conducting theoretical research and too many voices on the sidelines encouraging action. And that's what I talk about in much of this chapter. For example, here's a blogger at the Globalist Council on Foreign Relations website. It says drastic action, again, Council on Foreign Relations, CFR. Huge, way out there liberal think tank. Drastic action is needed before the window of opportunity closes altogether, given that emissions reductions alone are likely to prove insufficient in preventing severe effects from climate change. Scholars and policymakers are looking to geoengineering techniques as a possible last resort. Injecting particulate matter into the lower stratosphere, for instance, could help cool the planet by reflecting sunlight into space. Failing to study and develop geoengineering methods to help prevent the severe effects of climate change would be irresponsible. Friends, it's happening. Those contrails in the sky, it's happening. Here's the Brookings Institute. As worsening climate conditions are likely to generate continued worldwide interest in geoengineering deployment. By the way, worsening climate conditions. You know, if you were to look outside my house right now, it's a beautiful sunny day. It's been a gorgeous spring. So, And when we have had bad weather, guess what? I understand the bad weather's good. We need rain. We need snow. I understand the benefits of high winds. It's a wonderful way to clean out nature. You know, the debris left over from the way things grow and the way things live and the way things die on planet Earth. Everything in our weather has a purpose and a benefit. Sometimes weather can be very, very dangerous. I understand that. Hurricanes are very, very scary and very, very deadly. But guess what? Hurricanes are a natural function of a healthy atmosphere. They transport heat from the equator into the upper atmosphere so that the cooler parts of the earth are habitable. I digress. As worsening climate conditions are likely to generate continued worldwide interest in geoengineering development and deployment, the world cannot afford to wait until an emergency arrives if it hopes to navigate increasingly complicated climate and geoengineering scenarios. States should collaborate to develop and refine international norms and institutions to adequately prepare the world for the inevitable stresses of continued climate change and the resulting reactions from states and other actors. Thank God the Biden administration is not in power. Who knows what kind of experiments they'd be doing right now. And then the portion of the chapter entitled Weather Gods. In 2023, at the age of 92, George Soros took to the stage at the Munich Security Conference to expound upon the idea of climate change. His solution: reflect the sun's energy away from the polar ice caps to keep them from melting. Here's what he said. Let me start with a bold assertion. Our civilization is in danger of collapsing because of the inexorable advance of climate change. This is a very succinct statement, but I believe it provides an accurate summary of the current state of affairs. British climate scientist Sir David King has a plan to repair the climate system. He wants to recreate the albedo effects by creating white clouds high above the earth. With proper scientific safeguards and in consultation with local indigenous communities, this project could help revitalize the Arctic climate system, which governs the entire global climate system. The message is clear. Human interference has destroyed a previously stable system, and human ingenuity, both local and international, will be needed to restore it. At present, practically all the efforts to fight climate change are focused on mitigation and adaptation. They are necessary but not sufficient. The climate system is broken and needs to be repaired. That's the main message I'd like to convey this evening. George Soros supporting radical, wild, dangerous, crazy geoengineering in 2023. In 2021, Bill Gates, who, by the way, has financially backed the Harvard University Solar Geoengineering Research Program. He said this, it would be, he said the schools, he talked about the future of solar geoengineering and what it will look like. He said it would entail flying a suite of aircraft 30 odd miles above the Earth's surface to inject millions of tons of sulfate particulates into the air, high up in the stratosphere. These particulates would shroud the globe in a chemical mirror, reflecting away some of the sun's radiation before it could be trapped by greenhouse gases. You could screw up the planet Earth like no one's ever even imagined by doing something like this. He could throw us into an ice age with something as kooky as this. You know, after reading some of the work produced by Harvard's geoengineering research program, it seems like they're trying to downplay their efforts, continually using the word small to minimize perceptions about the atmospheric invention they intend to induce into the sky. In one paper, they insist that what they are doing is, quote, really not a test of solar geoengineering per se. Here's the point I make. Jeff Bezos is into this as well. He entered the fray with his billions of dollars, putting Amazon's supercomputers to work to model the effects of SO2 injections in the stratosphere. Well, you know what? I hope his models say that this is madness, but I don't think so. And Dustin Moskovitz, a billionaire Facebook co-founder, pumped in nearly $1 million to study the potential effects of solar geoengineering. I hope Moskovitz's research said, this is crazy stuff, let's don't do it. But for some reason, I doubt it. But you know, the amazing thing is here, they say they have entire wings at these universities, Harvard, MIT, University of Chicago. They have entire wings studying this. Why wouldn't they be doing it? Why wouldn't they be making practical efforts to study the effects of this stuff in the sky? Come on, man. They say they're not doing it. I believe they're doing it. Who owns those planes that are crisscrossing the sky? What is happening up there? There's one guy from the University of Chicago. His name is David Keith. He was on Colbert's show back when Colbert had a comedy show back in the day, 2013. And Dr. Keith said this. He was talking about geoengineering. And Colbert's kind of being the straight man, sort of the funny man, but he's pulling this information out of Dr. Keith. And Keith said, well, you start with just a fleet of 2 or 3 kinds of modified business jets. You put, say, 20,000 tons of sulfuric acid into the stratosphere every year. And each year you have to put a little more in because this doesn't, in the long run, mean that you can forget about cutting emissions because we need to rein emissions in. And then Colbert says, so in the meantime, we're shrouding the earth in sulfuric acid. And Keith says, well, people are terrified about talking about this, but they do that because they're scared. But it will prevent us from having too many emissions in the sky, he says. And Colbert says, too many emissions in the sky, but now you're pumping sulfuric acid into the sky. And Keith says, yeah. And Colbert says, is there any possible way this can come back to bite us in the ass? I mean, blanketing the earth in sulfuric acid, all over the earth. And Keith says, okay, I get the question, but we put 50 million tons of sulfuric acid into the air as pollution right now, and it kills 1 million people worldwide every year. And Colbert says, is that good or bad? And Keith says, well, it's terrible. And Colbert says, so will it be better if we put more in? And he got a lot of laughs. And Keith says, listen, we're talking about 1% of that, a tiny fraction of that. So we could reduce that sulfuric acid emission that's naturally occurring in the sky by adding more to it. And Colbert says, but if it kills 1 million people, Keith says, well, then that's bad. And Colbert says, but we're only going to do 1% more. So we're just going to kill 10,000 people more. And Keith says, okay, you can do the math. That's great. But killing people is not the objective here. Do you see how crazy this is all sounding? And Colbert says, okay, killing people is not the objective. I just wanted to be clear. And Keith finally says, actually slowing climate change. That's stopping climate change in a way that could help people in this generation, people living now, in a way in which there's no easy alternative. The bottom line from that crazy conversation on Colbert's show between Dr. Keith from the University of Chicago and Colbert, who is kind of playing devil's advocate. I'm not a big fan of Colbert. But the point is, even these people are admitting, okay, we may kill a few people in the process, but, we've got to end this global warming thing. This is how whacked these people are. To think that they can play games with Mother Nature and get away with it. And to me, that's what's so frightening. So you think about this. I examined one research paper written by Keith after I saw this interview with Colbert that literally says, just to prove my point, that literally says the falling sulfuric acid would offset the temperature of the earth, and as a result of all of this, so we would go up, we would seed the clouds, we'd wash sulfuric acid out, we'd be able to lower the Earth's temperature from 1.3 degrees Celsius warmer than it should be right now to 1 degree Celsius warmer than it should be. So we'll drop the temperature 0.3 of a degree. And in the process, listen to this, in the process, it would, quote, resulting in an additional 69,000 premature mortalities per year. In other words, they're saying, yeah, we can lower the Earth's temperature by 0.3 of a degree. 69,000 people will probably die, but it'll be worth it. These people are crazy. These people are void of a moral spine. And thank God that these people are not currently in the White House. 69,000 deaths while trying to save the Earth, I write. What's to say that number's not underestimated? And there are additional concerns. Sulfates continue to gnaw into the ozone layer, the planet's primary solar radiation diffuser. While SO3 is injected into the atmosphere, well, okay, I start to get a little bit technical here, and I apologize. But one more thing from the book. Sorry about that. In an interview with CNBC, UCLA environmental law professor Edward Parson, an advocate of solar geoengineering, admitted that spraying sulfur into the stratosphere will, quote, mess with the ozone chemistry, end quote. Given the potential harm to both the environment and humans from sulfuric acid aerosols, Parson was then asked whether these known negatives are worth rolling the dice. And he responded yes in this interview on CNBC. He said, respiratory illness is bad, absolutely, and spraying sulfur into the atmosphere would contribute in the bad direction to all of those effects, but you have to ask how much and relative to what. Geoengineering is loaded with unease, I write in the conclusion of this chapter. To think that bad actors could increase and create unrelenting waves of devastating weather on an enemy would be like carrying out a prolonged military bombing raid at a fraction of the cost. In solar geoengineering, it's the hellish dreams of mad scientists and megalomaniacs. It's wild to think, my friends, how far we would have pushed the envelope on this had the Biden administration or the Harris administration been able to continue their reign of crazy power in Washington, D.C. But we have a new sheriff in town, and for that, we should be grateful. And the fact that I'm not hearing a lot about global warming, climate change, or any of that stuff right now is encouraging to me. But I look up in the sky, and I see those crisscrosses. I don't know whose planes those are. I don't know how high those planes are flying. I don't know what they're doing. But I just go back into my memory bank as a kid, and I don't remember. And I've always, listen, the reason why I got into meteorology is because I love looking at the sky. Always have. I don't remember that from years gone by. And so that's what caused me to write this particular chapter of the book. Propagandize climate change. Propagandize climate change cult groupthink. It's a movement that must be stopped. Otherwise, we wind up going into a brave new world, which is the next chapter. Thank you, my friends, for taking the better part of an hour to meet with me in this particular podcast episode of the Brian Sussman Show. Climate Cult, Exposing and Defeating the War on Life, Liberty, and Property. Available wherever you buy books. You can get it at Barnes & Noble. You can get it at Amazon. And, of course, there's also the audio version of the book as well, which I do narrate. God bless you, my friends. Until next time.